Okay, as promised, it's 12:02 and we will get started. And those 2 minutes did make a difference. I see we've got a few more people on. So thank you everybody for joining. My name is Galen Armstrong. I'm calling in from Duncan, BC on Vancouver Island in Cowichan Territories, unceded Cowichan Territories. I'm going to just do a short introduction and then turn it over to our climate campaigner, Jens Wieting. Jens, many of you will know. I believe many of you were on the previous webinars that we did. We did a series, and then we also did in the last, I think 6 weeks ago or so, we did another webinar. We'll continue to do these. That's a really good way of updating you all on what's going on in our campaigns. So I'm the lead organizer with Sierra Club BC. I do most of the work that I do is on our old growth forest campaign. You can just a couple of housekeeping things. You can write in the chat box if you've got any questions. I see that one person has said, Karen said she's from Yubu, not far from here, in the territory of the Cowichan people. So it's a great way to introduce yourself if you'd like to just say your name and where you're calling in from. And then once we get to the question and answer period, you can put your questions in there for Jens. So today we're doing an old growth forest update. There's really a lot going on, and Jens will explain it all, but there's a lot going on with the BC government's processes. We've got the FERPA review happening, as well as an old growth process that you can participate in. And that was really the main catalyst to do this webinar, to let folks know that there's a process now that you can participate in, and we really encourage you to do so. So we'll explain that. I think that's about it. If you do ask a question, once we get to that spot, I can unmute you. You can use your video, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, I will introduce Jens Wieting. He's our senior climate campaigner, and he's been working on forests for many years. I'm just unmuting you here, Jens. Jens did a lot of work on the Great Bear Rainforest agreements, and now he's able to sort of broaden his scope, and he's looking at forest policy from an entire province perspective, and of course also from the climate perspective, which is a global perspective. And we've talked a lot about how important the forests we have here in British Columbia are in the global climate fight. So Jens, I'll let you go ahead and share your screen if you'd like to, and take it away.
Thanks, Galen, and hi everyone. It's really fantastic to see a big number of people joining us from noon to 1. I'm working from home today from East Vancouver. I'm here in the territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish peoples. And again, thanks so much for joining us. It's really important. Today, I believe we have a little bit more time for discussion. It's a little different now. We kind of set the stage with a series of speakers looking at a number of topics, and now we are in this campaign and things are happening, not with the speed that we want, but certainly quite a few things are happening. Today, I could say that we will talk. I will share some updates related to 3 Ps. The FERPA, the Forest Range Practices Act, as you know, is the BC forestry regulation, and we will talk about the panel, the 2nd P, the Old Growth Panel announced in July, and we will talk about our poll, our remarkable polling results showing strong support for old growth protection in BC. A few more updates, a few more issues we can take a closer look and discuss, but I will use my slides now. So first I will share, and here we go. So I stopped counting how many webinars, probably more than a dozen by now.
Something like that, yeah.
So Here's a quick list of bullet points, some of the topics I would like to update you on. So the FERPA process, again, that's the commitment from the BC government to make a series of changes in BC's most important forestry regulation. And we will talk about the OldGrowth Panel. I want to quickly remind everyone about the importance of the commitment of the federal government to support indigenous protected areas. And I also want to touch base quickly on the very important announcement. Many of you followed the news about the BC commitment, the law to implement UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And the key message today is, what are we working towards? We want strong outcomes. In early 2020, we want the BC government to include bold action for old growth in those changes. And then the panel is kind of an unexpected development because it will take a lot of time for this old growth panel to develop recommendations. But we will weigh in and want to make sure that this panel will develop strong recommendations. Unfortunately, we will not find out about what exactly those recommendations are until late 2020. But I thought this is a really important point. I want to make it early. So here's a reminder about the situation we are in. You all know that we are running out of old growth trees in this part of the world, and what remains are highly endangered ecosystems. So we got a bit excited when the NDP won the election in 2017 because they promised in their election platform, in partnership with First Nations and communities, we will modernize land use planning to effectively and sustainably manage BC's ecosystems, rivers, lakes, watersheds, forests, and old growth, while accounting for cumulative effects. So it's sustainably managing BC's ecosystems. That can only mean when an ecosystem becomes so rare that the species that depend on it disappear, you must protect it. And that's true for most of BC's old growth ecosystems. And they also said they would take an evidence-based scientific approach and use the ecosystem-based management of the Great Bear Rainforest as a model. And that's a very important commitment too, because the most important recommendation from the scientists was you have to look at the percentages of remaining old growth. If those percentages fall below 70, that's your low risk threshold, you are starting to get into problematic territory, and below 30% is high risk, is higher than high risk. In fact, when you have less than 30% of the old growth left, again, that's the case in most parts of the province. Here's a almost brand new Globe and Mail article from a few days ago. While government consults some more, logging in BC's old growth forest continues. I talked with Justin Hunter about the old growth panel, and the concern is that this old growth panel, many of you heard about and we will talk about, was announced in July 17, just 2 days after the deadline of the BC government for input to hear about changes in FERPA. So we have 2 steps here that, to looking at them together, they make us very cautious and a bit suspicious, because the government already asked us for input, and many of you submitted input. The deadline was July 15 and was all about what changes are needed, what are the changes that British Columbians want in BC's forestry laws. We will make some changes in 2020 was the message from the BC government. Let us know what you need to see here. And old growth played a very important role in it. And only 2 days later, the BC government announced an old growth panel. And the old growth panel will hear from British Columbians about their views, what they think about old growth. Is all very high level and not clear how exactly they will use the recommendations. So again, unfortunately, there's no other choice than insist that both processes must be used effectively, first to get changes in FERPA, and then more steps for old growth in the recommendations from the panel. Check out the article, it's pretty interesting. So I want to also mention, as we are now in the update part of my presentation, the very important announcement from the federal government in August. So in contrast to the BC government, the federal government is actually showing some significant leadership in terms of increasing protection across Canada. And they're doing this the right way. They're doing this by supporting Indigenous peoples that are seeking more protection of their lands. And the original commitment was 1.3 billion federal funding to support Indigenous peoples that want to create Indigenous protected areas. And in August, we heard about a significant portion, 175 million, now essentially on track for a number of projects, 27 initiatives. This is from a Narwhal article. And I think it's very important if some of you continue to engage with the BC government, either regarding FERPA or the panel, remind the BC government that part of old growth protection, part of protection, increased protection of all endangered ecosystems must be the provincial government showing similar leadership, similar matching funding to support Indigenous protected areas. And oh, I went in the wrong direction here. And here's a reminder about one of the regions that is very important for Indigenous peoples and for old growth, Clayoquot Sound. So this is a photo I showed before. It's January 2017, the Ahousaht leadership announcing that they have finalized the land use vision for the territory, which is the majority of Clayoquot Sound, with the majority of the intact rainforest on Vancouver Island. And they are talking to the federal government about receiving the needed financial support. And we are not seeing the leadership from the BC government to working with similar passion and commitment to support this. So this is another example. We have to remind MLAs, we have to remind the panel that this and similar initiatives must be supported. And we have a map here showing how the Ahousaht First Nation wants to protect 80% of their land. So Flores Island and large areas across the mainland portion of Clayoquot Sound would be permanently protected if they receive the needed support. And similarly important in the context of conservation and Indigenous rights, the milestone announcement, a very promising development in BC from October 25, that BC will be the first province in Canada to legally enshrine how to ensure that UNDRIP will be implemented in BC. What this means that in the coming years and decades, all provincial regulation must be reformed, must be changed to make sure that Indigenous rights are truly respected in BC. And I want to share, I will jump forward here for a moment. I want to share a quote here from Judith Sayers, who worked with us when we released the strong results showing support for old growth protection. So she said about BC's declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples and the strong old growth result that once BC's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples becomes law, the BC government must amend forestry laws and regulations to ensure the rights of the Nuu-chah-nulth in old growth forest are respected. So we might as well start that protection immediately. I think the most important thing the BC government has to do in the context of this new law is to create mechanisms that give indigenous peoples actually a choice. So we are now looking at this interim period where the BC government made a commitment, but the laws have not changed. And in the current situation, under business as usual, many of the remaining intact old growth forests will be logged, whether the First Nations support it or not, because there's no strong law to protect their interests. So for these cases, the BC government must come up with solutions to take the pressure off the land, support nations that then want to choose a different path, and do not force them to log under the current laws and regulation. So unfortunately, I have to jump back here. So we were here, and I will take a closer look with you now at this panel. So what do we know about the panel? There are two people, Gary Merkel and Al Gorley. We know that they have a history of working with industry and government, so we cannot expect revolutionary recommendations from them. But we also heard a lot about how the two people insist that they will be really independent. So they will develop their recommendations without censorship. They will listen. They insist that they will have the freedom to summarize what they heard and develop recommendations without government looking over their shoulder. And we also heard from a few people who already met with them that they seem to be concerned about what they learned from ecologists and other experts that are concerned about how little is remaining. So we hope that if you decide to meet with the panel, that it will be an effective use of your time. Maybe not in terms of a short-term outcome, but hopefully in late 2020, we will see strong recommendations if enough of us decide to sit down with them. I will meet with them on Monday and focus a lot on climate urgency. We will have a little bit more time to talk about the panel and answer your questions in a moment. Here are just a few points why we believe we need urgent action. The current land use plans, most of them are outdated. We have modern conservation science today. There are a lot of development when it comes to indigenous legal rights, indigenous people's rights, and of course the climate crisis. These are all reasons you could quote when you talk to the panel. And old growth ecosystems are disappearing. So that means that ecological risk for the species that depend on them is increasing every day, every month, every year. And the damages from continued clear-cut logging are increasing with small remaining areas means that more species will disappear if you have so little left. And we will have more climate impacts like drought, flooding, and in some cases even fire if we have dried out landscapes as a result of too much logging. BC's economy is changing. Fortunately, there are many economic sectors that are growing, and we depend less on old growth logging today. And we can have long-term forestry jobs if we do it the right way, allowing for long-term jobs, not for short-term jobs. Again, indigenous rights are strengthened, and we have new models for conservation that indigenous peoples are supporting and are interested in. There's growing support. We'll talk more about our poll in a moment. And we have learned so many things in the Great Bear Rainforest, for example. So again, many of you heard this before, and just thought I'd give you a few bullet points what the main arguments might be in those meetings. Solutions, ingredients. These are the things that we need from government to make it happen. Leadership, make this a priority, not your business trip to Asia. We need moratoria, interim solutions. So some of the legal solutions may need a little bit of time. That means you need an interim conservation mechanism. Use the science. It's very effective because it's evidence. It can be used to remind all involved that we better listen to the scientists. If you are close to these dangerous thresholds, that's when you want to stop logging. And if you continue logging, it's not a long-term solution. We need to combine the conservation steps with the governance, the changes in the governance, and the nations taking control back over the land. That's the only modern way to find solutions for conservation. And significant funding for conservation. We already talked about that. Huge opportunities for the provincial government to team up with the federal government. We have lots of resources for you. If you want to read more, again, many of you know this already. Here's the link, and you can find more fact sheets, more recommendations. For example, I want to mention again that in July, 28 groups submitted joint recommendations on changes we need in FERPA. So not only for old growth, but for everything. And you can go back and find that if you are interested, 5 pages. Lots of information on forestry and carbon and climate urgency. Our January 2019 report is here. And also, we recently included in this list 10 recommendations. So this is number 5 in this list. 10 recommendations for old growth protection. That's a document that we shared with the BC government right away in 2017 when they took power, and we developed this jointly with Wilderness Committee and Ancient Forest Alliance. If you want to use that, it's all on our website. Our poll. So I hope many of you saw this. We're still working to get more media coverage about this, but we worked with Research Focus is the name of the company. You can find all the technical details on our website. They asked about close to 1,000 British Columbians, so it's a pretty strong poll, and 9 in 10 said they care about old growth. They want endangered old growth protected. And we have, here's the few examples from the polling, the questions we asked. Do you support or oppose taking action to defend endangered old growth forests in BC? 92% support taking action, and we had more than 60% strongly support, and then another even more moderately supporting. And across the province, so not just Vancouver Island, but also the Fraser Valley, Metro Vancouver, Southern BC, Northern Vancouver Island, and Northern BC. Strong values in the 80s and going all the way up to 97% in the Fraser Valley. And the second most important question was explicitly about this promise the NDP made in 2017, and explaining that this promise to use the model from the Great Bear Rainforest involves more protection for old growth, less logging, partnering with First Nations, and support for a more diversified economy. And we got the same strong support, 92%. You can see the breakdown here. So in this case was 69% saying this is very important, and another 23 moderately important. So again, 92% support. And we also asked about the reasons why people care. And So these were all in the 80% range, 80 to 90%, because there are many important and rare species that depend on old growth, and very good understanding that given our changing climate, if old growth trees are logged, they will never grow back in the same way. People know that old growth forests are being logged at a rapid rate, and there's very little remaining. It's a legacy for future generations. Again, 85% here, and they are globally rare and important. And they are important for First Nations cultural values. You can find this information and more on our website. I think the link was right here, sierraclubbc.ca forest poll. And I want to remind you in closing about like the most important, the key messages, if you have to keep it really brief, if you re-engage with the BC government, if you want to send another letter or a message from rainforestisland.ca, or send a quick short letter to Minister Donaldson looking at the latest developments, the climate crisis getting worse. It's about protecting the old growth and connecting this to strong support for First Nations rights and governance and their well-being. So not only supporting forestry and the annual cut and the tree farm license, but a diverse economy, and support long-term forestry, not forestry for short-term profit. Those are the three important ones. If you want to go back to Minister Donaldson, I think that's very important, and remind them that we need the changes in early 2020. And my last slide is simply a reminder that good things are actually happening in other parts of the world. And this is Victoria in Australia. So parts of Australia have temperate rainforest too, and Victoria is a state that only covers a small portion of Australia, but it's a huge country. So I actually had to look this up because I wasn't sure how big this region is. But Victoria in Australia is a state that has more than 200,000 square kilometers. It's a little bigger than my my former home country. It's a little well, wait a second. So it's similar. It's a similar size like West Germany, and they have temperate rainforest, and they have announced a commitment to phase out old growth logging by 2030, and significant funding here to support industry to move to essentially second growth logging or plantation forestry, which is another difficult topic, but it's very important that they're not simply protecting the old growth, they're also addressing the economic challenge and the transition. So with this, I want to open it up for discussion.
Awesome, thank you, Jens. Lots of information and lots going on. So we've already got one question here from Monica, but I'll just remind people that there is if you haven't already found it, there's a chat box. You should be able to click chat towards the bottom of your screen, and that's the place to put your questions in for Jens. So I'm going to go to Monica first, and we'll just see if she's still on here. So Monica, I'm going to unmute you and allow you to go ahead and ask your question directly. I think you can go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Hi, Galen. Hi, Jens.
Hi, Monica.
I don't even remember what the question was. Oh, yeah, the one about shrouded in secrecy. I have a couple of things, so I'll just do that first.
Okay.
Our group our group is Soft CV, and I think there are a couple of other people here today with us, Save Our Forest Team, Comox Valley. And we put in a request to the panel to meet with them And of course, it was really short notice, even to know that they were going to be in our area. They denied our request, and I think a couple of individual people as well requested to meet. They also denied that. So really hard to get in to see the panel. We then did a protest up in Campbell River, and only found out after we had done that protest in front of Claire Trevina's office that the panel was actually meeting just down the road.
Wow.
And yeah, so it seems to be shrouded in secrecy a bit and really hard to get in there. They're picking and choosing who they meet with. And yes, we can submit written things, which many of us have done, but we've been doing that for ages, and you guys must be feeling that as well. I'm listening to Jens talking about all of the things that you have researched and submitted to the government over the years. I look at 2016 on that list there. Since then, and since before that, I'm sure. And really, there's not much action. So yeah, we see another panel now, but how much difference is that really going to make?
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah.
It's a really good and difficult question, and there's obviously no simple answer. So my really high level answer is that we need a range of movements and groups and individual action to force the government to act. So clearly numbers are important, and a range of different engagements. So Sierra Club BC, as you know, is a charitable organization. That means that we have to choose our path within a certain corridor. As you know, we try to mobilize as many people as possible, and Galen can speak much better to this than I can, because he's a fantastic organizer. So that will continue to be important. Like, we will only win this if we see more people in the streets, whether that's days of action or the type of protest you just organized, and thank you for that. We need bigger numbers. And I still think that in addition to this, we have to continue to use these channels, but it's a very personal decision. I totally understand if some people will decide not to engage with this panel and rather organize a protest. I get that. So for us, and for me personally as Sierra Club campaigner, I want to make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned, and this means that I have to use some of my time to go back to them on Monday and make sure that they hear everything they should hear about the climate crisis and forests. Just to give you one example. Yeah, but it's astounding. And when I read the headline from Australia, I go like, why can we not have this headline here in BC? So there's hardly a day when I'm not a little bit in disbelief that that this work is so difficult. So I really want to encourage you to not give up and continue the fight and make your personal choices how to best to do this, and we will do our best to support you. Galen, do you want to say something that is smarter?
I don't know about that, but I can certainly express how I'm feeling, which is angry. I mean, I've seen plenty of subpar government processes, feedback processes, pipelines come to mind, but it's embarrassing to have them come and say, hey, we've got this process starting in 2 days. I don't really see how they can, it doesn't feel like it's in good faith. So, Monica, I see you were responding to Jens there, and you've got another question, so I'll come back to you in just a minute. But as Jens said, we need more people in the streets. We need, governments hate to have people in the streets. So thank you so much for those who participated in the recent protest in Campbell River. And we don't have another date for our next day of action, but we will continue to do those types of actions. People in local communities, when we've done those actions, have all of these received media attention. These things matter. We need the politicians to see that people actually care about this issue and these issues. So Monica, I'm going to go back to you. If I can unmute you again, and you've got another question, and I'll just encourage people to put their questions in the chat box there.
Hi, I've put myself on the video now too.
All right.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you, Galen? How are the babies?
Oh man, the babies, I can hear them upstairs crying, but they are fat and healthy.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I just actually don't have a question. Maybe it will end up being a question. I just wanted to share that just about a week ago, John Horgan was in Courtney. We found out about it at the last minute. He was here for a groundbreaking ceremony to do something about healthcare, which turns out it's questionable. Anyway, he was here, and I managed to sneak in at the end, in amongst all the suits, and put up a banner about saving forests. And I actually got to go and speak to him for a couple of minutes. And all I really wanted to say to him was that I thought that this old growth panel, being so secretive, was kind of a sham. But I didn't get a chance because he was on the defensive right away as soon as I said which group I was with. And the long and short of it is that he basically said to me that there was no way that he could do what I was asking, which was to call a moratorium on old growth logging, because he had all of these companies that they had agreements with and they would take legal action. So if I wanted him to do that, then I would basically be responsible for him having to take all the money out of healthcare and education and throw it towards all of these companies that they have agreements with. So it was quite a defensive answer that he gave me, and I was actually kind of shocked. And I did tell him not to put words in my mouth because I hadn't said that. I figured it's not so black and white. But what do? This is the premier that we're dealing with. This is what he's telling me. Either I, do something for you about forests, which will mean you have no healthcare and education, or I keep, making the companies happy. That's it for me. I've had enough. It's really shocking.
Well, if one of us gets into the situation again and actually with a few minutes to respond, I mean, there are a few things, again, we know from the Great Bear Rainforest, thanks God, because it's evidence that change is possible. So it's not perfect, and there remain many problems to address, but about 38% of the entire region is in some form of protected area, and there were less than 10% protected in the early 2000s. So that did cost a lot of money. So in some cases, I think companies receive compensation when new protected areas are created, but in the case of the Great Bear Rainforest, 85% of the forest overall will be set aside from logging, and about half of this is in protected areas, which is costly, but the other half is protected under, or will be set aside under, old growth targets. And the BC government can absolutely increase the percentage of old growth that must be protected. In many cases, taking this step means that old growth logging must be stopped. For example, the Environmental Law Center wrote this report for Sierra Club BC, arguing that the BC government should protect a minimum of 30% of every type of old growth forest. And we know that most of the old growth in most parts of the province is below 30%. So if they would do that, that would mean that old growth logging would end in most parts of the province. And this is absolutely a step the government could take if they had the political, if they had the leadership, if they had the political will. And based on all the evidence I'm aware of, there would be no legal mechanism forcing them to compensate companies for this. They would certainly have to work super hard to find funding for all kinds of things to support improved forest management, more jobs, and less damage per cubic meter for all the areas where forestry can continue, to ensure that we really have some economic benefits and jobs where forestry can continue, but there would be no legal mechanism. So pointing to the experience in the lessons learned in the Great Bear Rainforest is a strong way to counter them and say, BC has done this in one part of the province, now we need solutions across the province. We have done this before, it is possible, and the NEP promised to use this model. So there are few ways to counter what he said.
Excellent answer, Jens, thanks. And, you know, I would just add that we need to, you know, we saw the same types of financial arguments around Site C, which turned out to be bogus as well. And they love to draw you down into those types of conversations and into the weeds. And it's important for me, you know, it's important to just keep our values top of mind. And that, you know, we are at the last bit of old growth forest here, and it's so important to keep every bit that we have. So we do have questions that are rolling in. Thank you, everyone. I'm also, before I go to the next one, I'm just going to post again. I had posted a link to a short survey. If you can, at the end of this webinar, if you can click on this and give us a bit of feedback on this presentation, it's really helpful for us to improve what we're doing here. So just going up to see what the next question was, it looks like Dora said, oh no, this is a comment. I received an email. It indicates a member will be in touch with me to arrange a meeting, but hasn't happened yet. Now I'm going to Ria. Hi Ria, you've got a question about a possible alliance with the Loggers Union, and I'm just going to unmute you, Ria. Anything you want to add to that?
Hi, yeah, no, I noticed that some Interfor employees are on strike right now, and it seemed like maybe an opportune time to pursue some sort of alliance with them in terms of what you're talking about, securing long-term sustainable jobs in second growth forestry. And I know Sierra Club is maybe trying to, you know, form some of those alliances and like bridge that gap between like forestry workers and environmentalists and kind of try to work together, because as you're saying, like it is in their interest as well. And this just seemed like maybe an opportune time to reach out to them. And I was just wondering if there's anything like that on your radar.
Yeah, so fortunately, at least one union is pretty progressive when it comes to old growth protection. It's the Private and Public Workers of Canada, PPWC. So they have strongly supported old growth protection a number of times, and they are very strong on phasing out raw log exports, and they are similarly frustrated with the BC government and the lack of action on both more protection and phasing out raw log exports. A year and a half ago, I believe in early 2018, the CCPA, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and with thanks to Ben Parfitt, brought together 2 unions and 2 environmental groups, Sierra Club BC, Wilderness Committee, and PPWC, and I would have to go back and check the other union, but bringing us together and speaking out about both old growth protection and raw log exports. So that's where we find some common ground. But it's also true that unfortunately, one very big union, the steelworkers, are not open-minded at all when it comes to old growth protection. So with them, we often have very difficult encounters. But some of our groups are trying to watch out for opportunities to to stand in solidarity with loggers on strike, because as Torrance recently wrote in the Vancouver Sun op-ed, these are the same root causes: the depletion of the old growth and trampling on workers' rights have a similar. You can find easily a similar root cause there, and that's it's profit. It's private companies making shareholder value a priority, and with terrible consequences both for forests and for workers. So thanks for asking about that. It's very important, and we will definitely try to do as much as possible.
Thanks, Jens. And yeah, the more connections we have with with those people, workers, forestry workers, the better. So I really encourage folks, especially who are up in those areas, to reach out and support. There is a sort of a question. It's more of a comment from Megan about the recent protests that you did in Campbell River, and around 15 people came out, and so feeling like that wasn't effective, and wasn't really an exciting turnout. So Megan, I'm going to unmute you, and if you'd like to expand on that a little, you can go ahead.
Yeah, well, that was more just a comment, because Soft CV has an email list of over 80 people who, a lot of them signed up at the June 6th Day of Action in Courtenay, and yet the people on that email list didn't come out for this action. Now, I know we didn't have much notice, so that may be a factor, but it's really difficult, and you must feel this all the time. It's really difficult to be confronted with what seems to be apathy, even though people will say, like in your poll, that 92% of British Columbians care about this, but they're not out in the streets. And why is that? But I know that's really a rhetorical question. But I do have another question further down in the feed.
Oh, I did not at all mean to. I accidentally muted you there. I didn't mean to mute you, but I do want to, before you go to that question, I actually would like to respond to what you just said. And then I think we've got a couple more questions, but let me respond to that.
Oh, you muted yourself, Galen.
Oh, thanks. As organizers, and there's a lot of organizers on this call, we, probably any organizer has experienced that, where you organize something, whether it's an event or a protest, etc., where you don't get a great turnout. And so there can be lots of reasons why. One is that if people are going to show up to something, like take time out of their busy schedules, they need to know they're going to do it because they think it's going to be effective. And so, I mean, that's one of the main reasons. That's a really good reason, an important reason. And so when we saw the big global climate rallies that just happened, millions of people showed up around the world, and locally we all, many of us were able to go to some really powerful and well-attended events. And that, that has a lot of factors, but, one of the reasons a lot of people show up to that is because they could see that it was a global movement. They could see that this is happening all over the world, and had this feeling that, okay, if I go, this is really important. This is really going to make a difference. This is something that I want to be a part of. And so there's that excitement there. We've been able to, capture some small percent of that type of excitement when we do the days of action, and especially when we do days of action with other groups that are involved. When we show people, hey, this is happening province-wide, even if you only have whatever 15 or 20 people show up to your event, that you're part of an event that has hundreds or thousands of people participating. So there's that feeling that it's powerful, and it's not just you showing up. So that's one factor, and that's something, as organizers, we need to consider. The notice thing, of course, is always important. If there's all kinds of promotion and planning things that you can do to hype it up and amp it up. But the other thing that's really important is relationships. And so when I do an event, you know, I know there's a certain number of people who are going to show up there, not even necessarily because they really care about the issue. They probably do. They may not think, okay, this rally or this event is going to, you know, change the, you know, move the dial, really make the change, but they have a relationship with me, you know, whether, you know, it's a friendship or more of a, you know, like we've been organizing together, some kind of relationship, and probably with other people there. And so that's why when you have a group, having constant really opportunities to get together and to get to know one another, to really see each other as people, makes such a difference when it comes around to the bigger rally things. You can, you know, and it's not me that holds all this constellation of relationships. I have a few relationships, but I know that there's probably 5 or 6 people who are going to come, and they also have these close relationships. They can call on their networks, and so these networks are really held together by relationships. If I get an email from someone who I don't really know, or maybe I don't know at all, maybe I haven't met, like, it's not going to move me much. You know, I'm not going to think, oh, Joe so-and-so wants me to show up to this thing. Like, well, we'll see. I might go to lunch instead. But if I know Joe and if we have some kind of connection, I'm way more likely to show up there. So I can't stress enough the power of just having, you know, social events where you can show up. Okay, so I know that we're running out of time, so I'll stop talking on that. I could talk all day on that kind of topic. Well, Megan, you had another question, so let's go ahead and, yeah, you're still unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So when Monica was talking with John Horgan, it sounded from what Monica said that he was suggesting there were free trade agreement clauses that I'm assuming are the ISDS clause, the investor, whatever, dispute settlement clauses. And it sounded like he was suggesting that BC would be open to massive lawsuits from either private companies, multinational companies, or other governments. Do you know if that is true? Is that a factor in BC's forestry industry, these ISDS clauses?
So I'm not sure, but if this would be the case, then I would again point to the Great Bear Rainforest, where government increased protection using ecosystem-based management. The last step was in 2016, so that's not a very long time ago, and there were no such threats, and there was certainly hostility from some industry sectors about it. So I'm not aware of a precedent where this type of action has been taken, and I think that it could be more problematic again when it comes to protected areas. But even then, we still have examples where new protected areas are being created. Not enough and not big enough, but this is entirely common to change laws, increase protection for endangered species or endangered ecosystems. So it sounds like it's a scare tactic. It's a scare narrative.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jens. So I see there's been some good discussion here.